Okay.
So
and
welcome, Pat. Take
thank
it
you
away.
very much, Jessica. And you're going to get us started with the poll, right? So
Yes.
people had answered the question, how many years of experience do you have working with the migrant education program in terms of eligibility determinations? And looking at the poll, we do have a good amount of people, 1 to 4 years and 5 to 10 years. Okay. So yes, that really, we do find that in terms of IDNR, we do have a lot of turnover, in the program. And so, it is very challenging to work with identification and recruitment. So, this is a very good opportunity for you to be participating in this IDRC Summer Institute. So I want to just take a minute and welcome everybody to the Summer Institute on behalf of the Office of Migrant Education at the U.S. Department of Education. It's a beautiful day here in the Washington, D.C. area. I hope it's a beautiful day where you are. And I just want to get started by letting you all know how important your attendance is at this event, because dealing with identification and recruitment of this unique population, it is so critical you are so critical for the migrant education program. And I just want to take a minute and express my gratitude and appreciation for all of you for the critical role that you play in the migrant education program. Okay, with that being said, I want to move on here. And as I just said, that IDNR is a critical function of the migrant education program, and you and your role as a recruiter, you are the backbone of the program. Without you, we don't have a migrant education program. And for that reason, you are so instrumental to the program, because you're the ones who identify and recruit the children for the program. And without you, we don't have any children to serve. So for that reason, if you are good at your job, okay, and you identify and recruit all the children, whether it be in your district, in your region, or, if you are a statewide recruiter, if you identify the children that are there that are eligible for the MEP, then they are able to benefit from the program and the services that they are entitled to receive. On the other hand, if you don't put forth, and I am telling you, it is an all-out effort, because it is not easy to find the children and then recruit them into the program. It is, as you people who have been around for more than 2 years know, it is a challenge every day to be out there, doing your job. But if you don't put forth that all-out effort that it takes to find and recruit children into the program, many migratory children may not even fully benefit from school, and in some cases may not even attend school at all, if you as a recruiter have not reached out to their families. So, just as an example, we all know that out-of-school youth are a challenge to find, because they are here to work for a short time, they're socially isolated, they move frequently, they have fallen behind in school and may have given up completely and therefore dropped out, or they may have never been enrolled in school in the United States. And so again, talk about the challenge. How hard is it to find this group of youth? So you as recruiters, your roles as advocates, you are so critical to the program. And especially during the past 2 years with the pandemic going on, it is just incredible the job that you've been able to do. So what I would like to talk about right now is talk about the ongoing and future flexibilities. So we put out in May of 2020 a fact sheet that talked about flexibilities in terms of remote recruitment, waiver of interviewee signature on the certificate of eligibility, the COE, for remote interviews and remote re-interviews. And we have heard from many of our stakeholders that having this flexibility is still valuable and they want to have it maintained. Okay, and I'm not going to say post-pandemic, because we really are still in, the pandemic is ongoing. Okay, but They want that to be able to reach families, whether they be displaced by wildfires, whether there's some, still related to the pandemic or other weather-related events. It is so critical to have that remote interview and re-interview flexibility granted to you. So although flexibility to conduct re-interviews is built into the program regulations, where face-to-face make it impossible or impractical to have re-interviews, we have that flexibility. We don't have the flexibility for remote recruitment as a permanent option when face-to-face interviews are impractical. So we are moving forward with trying to make similar flexibilities for remote recruitment more permanent for the exact same reasons as I just mentioned. So please stay tuned for more information. And then as we have more information, we do communicate through our state MEP listservs, which go to your MEP directors. So please, I know everybody is very interested in this piece of information about this flexibility for interviews and as we have for the re-interviews. So please stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, continue to follow your state's guidance. Okay. All right. And as we move forward today, and you're working through all the different sessions that you're attending, I want you to be thinking about how reaching out to migratory children and youth, as I said before, it's a heart of the MEP. And without effective statewide IDNR, I cannot overemphasize how important it is to have a statewide strategy. Without a good statewide IDNR plan, as I said before, the neediest of migrant children may not be served. And an effective statewide IDNR action plan becomes the center of a network that connects migratory families and youth to schools and communities. And when growers and other employers trust the recruiter, they are more likely to allow recruitment at the employment site and to support the MEP. Recognizing the value of effective statewide IDNR is the first step in the right direction. The pandemic is ongoing, but we have come a long way from 2020. It is critical that the MEP recruitment practices evolve with the changing environment. So at one time, where everything was being done remotely, you need to be looking at your state for guidance in terms of getting out there and doing that face-to-face recruitment when it is safe to do so. And I'm sure in many areas now, you would say, yes, in my state, it is safe to do so. Okay. So in our results.ed.gov website, I hope everybody is familiar with that. As familiar as you are with the IDRC website, I hope you are as familiar with the results.ed.gov website, because we have a lot of resources there that are very good for recruiters. Okay. One of the things that we have on there is the IDNR manual. We also have the IDNR curriculum. And in the IDNR manual, we talk about the importance of a state action plan, and that it provides the overall direction for recruiters from across the state and includes the state's IDNR objectives for balanced recruitment efforts, as well as strategies, staff assignments, and timelines to meet those objectives. The state action plan for IDNR, it is, and it should be, a part of the state's comprehensive state plan for service delivery, because without finding children, you cannot deliver those services. And I also mentioned the importance of, in this action plan, to talk about balanced recruitment. And I know Jessica is going to talk about balanced recruitment throughout the whole Summer Institute. So just remember that term, because that is so important to the migrant education program, is to make sure that in your state plan, or you as a recruiter, that you are going out and your personal strategy is balanced, and how you are getting out there into the community, into schools, and working with the growers and other agencies. Okay. So right now, because I know that people are interested in trend analysis. But I do want to also look at the trend analysis because I want to talk about how crucial and necessary your job is. So right in front of you, you have a chart with the category 1 and category 2 national child counts. And as a reminder, category 1 is all eligible migratory children except those ages birth through 2. So you want to go out and identify all children ages birth all the way through high school graduation or up through their 22nd birthday, if they have not graduated from high school. But for the category 1 count that is associated with funding for your state, that begins with age 3, okay? And that is those children who resided in your state for 1 or more days during the performance period, which starts September 1 and concludes on August 31. Category 2 is a number of category 1 children who were provided MEP-funded services during the summer or intercession periods. So category 2 is a subset of category 1. So on the screen in front of me, you can see, and down at the bottom, it does say preliminary for 2021, but right now those counts have just been finalized right after I sent the slides forward. So those are final counts if you're looking at them. So you can see, how we have slowly declined, in the category 1 count. And if you look at 1920, you can see, that is where the pandemic occurred. And you can see a drop there. Before that, the drop was not so bad, but then you can see a significant drop. And we had hoped that going into 2021, we would be seeing an uptick, but you can see that we still have another significant drop. And I would go to you, as recruiters to say, do you think it's because of the pandemic? It is still ongoing. Is it because families are trying to fly under the radar? What is it that we keep on experiencing, post, I don't want to say post-pandemic, ongoing pandemic, a significant drop? And what can you do as recruiters to try to turn that around? Now, if you look at the orange bar down at the bottom, you can see that has remained pretty much steady. And that is, again, because it's a subset of category 1, and you can see it's about 33%, of children that are eligible for the states are usually what gets served in category 2. So I do want to hope that as we're moving into finishing up this performance period, 21-22, which ends August 31st, that we do see more of an uptick, that we're able to move, nationally up from that 260,000 odd number of children, up into a little bit more of an increase, in that it is not a continuing decline. So we'll have to wait and see, as we move forward into this performance period and we get closer to the end of it, where we stand. So moving on, this way, I just wanted to look still at the category 1 child count comparison for the top 5 states. And you can see, that again, this is a category 1 comparison, and you can see how each state of the top 5 states that from performance period 2017, down at the bottom at the legend, it goes 2017 and it goes from to 2021. So you can see the percentage change in the 4 years, and each one of the states have declined a little bit, the top 5 states. And the reason why I put the top 5 states on is because, they have a significant number of migratory children. So overall, when we're talking about a national count, they really impact the national count. And you can see, Washington State really has almost maintained their level of their category 1 count. So if you are in those top 5 states, I would challenge you as recruiters, to make sure that you are doing everything that you can do, within your sphere of influence to be out there finding the children who are potentially eligible for the program. Okay, this is the exact same thing with the Category 1 count changes by state from 2019-20 performance period to 2020-21 performance period. It's a heat map for the nation, and you can see again where we have the lightest blue is the greatest percentage of change, the least percentage of change to the highest percentage of change, okay, by color. Okay, so the lightest, if I could say that one more time to make sure I didn't confuse you, because I was confusing myself there. The lightest color is the highest in the decrease, the highest number or the biggest decrease in the population in that particular state. And the darkest color is the increase in the population. I think that's a better way of saying it. Okay. Moving on to Category 2. So if we look at Category 2 child count comparison for the top 5 states by state size, you can see that this is the, that there has been a drop in the number of students that have been served, in Category 2 from 2017-18 performance period all the way up through performance period 2021. And you can see that California, Oregon, Texas, and Florida have had a decrease in the number of children who are served during the summer, or intercession periods. But you can see in terms of Washington State, they actually had an increase. Okay. And by comparison, overall, we had just looked at the national Category 2 count that had a decrease from that performance period of 8.61%. Okay, so why do I show up, or why am I talking about the Category 2 count? And you can see here overall the map of the United States. And again, the percentage change, the greatest decrease is the lightest color. And then the least amount of decrease, I guess, if you want to say it that way, is in the darkest color. Now, why is it important to talk about Category 2? You say, well, Category 2 is just a subset of Category 1. What does it make a difference? Well, Category 2 makes a difference because if you are looking at your allocation is based on the average of, for Category 1, the last 3 performance periods. And if you remember, I told you that Category 1 was just a residency count. It's just the number of children who are residing in your state for 1 or more days. Okay. Category 2 count is the number of children that received an MEP funded summer or intercession service. So there's a lot more money that goes into providing a service than it is just for a residency check. So there's going to be a lot more money that's associated with Category 2. Category 1 is the average of the previous 3 performance periods, while Category 2 is just the count of the previous performance period. So if a state wants to see an increase in their allocation, their strategy should be, yes, we need to increase our Category 1 count wherever possible to make sure we're doing really effective identification and recruitment so that we can find every child in the state that's eligible for the program. But at the same time, we also want to maximize our Category 2 participation, because that is going to have an impact in our allocation. You have an impact in your allocation, then it allows you to put more recruiters out, and it allows you to serve more children. So you really need to impact that allocation to be able to impact your identification and recruitment and impact your services on the children that are in your state, if that makes sense to you. Okay, so my question to you, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges in carrying out your work that we should be aware of at the federal level? What do you may want me to be aware of in terms of, hey, I'm trying to do IDNR out here, I'm in this state, this is what would really help me. This would be a resource that, would be valuable to me. One thing I will tell you is that we have our consortium incentive grant process. And as you know, IDRC is a consortium incentive grant that is funded by the Office of Migrant Education. So to me, IDRC is a wonderful resource for you. It is there not only if you are a participant in the consortium incentive grant, but you are able to participate as a part of the Summer Recruitment Institute. They have a website where they have marvelous resources that are on there. So for me, one of the biggest resources that I can provide you in helping you carry out your work is this identification and recruitment consortium that you're able to either participate in as a full member, or you can participate in by coming to these events. Okay, so Jessica, I think we are kind of winding down, but if one or two people wouldn't mind, just if they want to, like, throw out to share, I would like to know one success or win that they have experienced in this work that could be in an innovative or effective strategy for identifying eligible children. I would love to leave with a success story. So I don't know if we open up, if somebody has a success story to share with us. I would love to hear it.
There's an idea. Emily Williams just made a comment. She's one of the ones that the numbers jumped like crazy. Do you want me to see if Emily could unmute and kind of talk about their strategy with that?
Yes, I think that would be wonderful.
All right, Emily, let me find you and unmute you if you're good with that. Let me see. I'm going to promote you to a panelist so then you can see you and you can talk.
Okay, and then I will just go through and finish up and turn and see if we have any other questions and turn it over to you. So
now, Emily, I don't know if I'll just ask you to unmute. I'm putting you on the spot.
Hey, yeah, no, it's totally fine. I put myself on the spot, I put it out there in the chat. It just took a second for me to leave as a need to come here. So hey y'all. We would be glad to come and talk to y'all anytime. It was really scary. We kind of made a jump to go from kind of doing things how we've always done it to, and again, I recognize we were very fortunate that our director was super on board. He used to be a recruiter, so I think he really gets it in a way that people who've recruited before, like Pat, really get the spirit of migrant. But we just did a complete overhaul of how we do our services and IDNR based off of looking at numbers, looking at these trends, really doing what you're supposed to do, right? With that CNA SDP process. It's not just annoying bots to check. If you really get into it and really listen to what's going on in your community, it can help you a lot. So we took the jump. It was a little scary, not gonna lie. We, just hired on a bunch of new people, but even right now we're all in our little WhatsApp group, chatting about the program and something like, wow, look at the big jump. That's so great. And I just can't, the facts speak for themselves. It worked. We would be glad to talk to y'all anytime. I put my information in the chat. I can put it again. We can do it to everybody's foreheads. Anytime, I would love to chat because I did a lot of cherry picking. That's what I did. I talked to a lot of different states about what are they doing? What are they doing? Are they seeing similar trends? What are they doing about it? And I was just like, all right, I'm gonna take that from Iowa. I'm gonna take this from Massachusetts. I'm gonna take a little bit of this from New York. And just see, is it perfect? Absolutely not. But we're definitely well on our way, and rehauling is a huge difference for us. I would love to encourage any of you who are thinking about taking the plunge, and especially those of you who are in positions of power, who might be like a supervisor or director or something. If people in your field are asking for a change, really listen to that as well. I would encourage you.
And I would just like to mention to everybody that because Emily in South Carolina, you had noticed that South Carolina was on the map there in both cases in the Category 1 and Category 2 count that did increase, and they were the darker colors in both of them. And Emily and Zach, her director, came on to our annual directors meeting in March and spoke to the state directors about just what she's saying about trying to think outside of the box, put everything, what I do know, that's great. If it you continue to do the same old all the time, and it's not getting you the results that you want. How can you reach out there? How can you talk to people? As she used the term cherry pick, I love that, Emily. And, just get out there, network, and find out what works for them and what will work for you, and incorporate that into your plan, as we're talking about how important it is to have a good statewide action plan, because it's all about action. You have to get out there, you have to be acting, you have to be proactive. If you're sitting at home and you're not out there, doing the recruitment and making the effort, then it's very hard to be successful with IDNR, because it is quite a challenge. And I think Emily would agree that it is quite a challenge, as Jessica would agree also. So thank you very much, Emily.
We've got a few comments in the chat box. I don't know if you want to look at a few of those. I think some people have mentioned some challenges they're having, like gas prices and being tied to specific, prices that are, the rate that they're reimbursed.
Yeah. And right now, yeah, I mean, that is something, a comment that I would say that is definitely a challenge, because gas prices have risen significantly. So I would say with something like that, again, having to strategize is just really making sure that you have a really good plan in place, and that you're not just driving around, and
Exactly.
you know where you're going, and you have it mapped out, and you have a strategy, and you're not just filling out your mileage charts, that you're actually using your recruiter logs, and you're saying, you're strategizing, what is my week going to look like? So I'm going to be the most effective I can be, using my gas, and going out there and trying to figure out, how do I maximize my effort when I'm out on the road, and that does take a strategy, and that does take filling out a recruiter log, and really think about what you're going to do from week to week. Emily, do you want to add anything to that about the gas prices?
Oh boy, not really. That is a tricky one. You got it, Pat.
Yeah, that's hard. Jessica, is there anything else before we move on that people say is a challenge?
We have one that says, like, just explaining to undocumented populations being scared to kind of participate. Yes. A lot of stigma with the word migrant. Mm-hmm. And some of those same things that we're seeing.
Yes, and migrant has been a stigma for a long time, and we've even advocated in the statute to change it, but has stayed as, the migrant education program, agricultural mobility, anything like that, that you can, try to work into it, the children of agricultural migratory farm workers, and try not to use the word migrant so much, because it does have that stigma attached to it. And it really is hard, because the families do want to fly under the radar, and they are afraid. That's why you have to become so integral, and you have to really have balanced recruitment, not just work through the school, but you have to work through, the growers, the agribusinesses, the community agencies, migrant health, migrant seasonal Head Start. You have to be well known in the community. You have to be going to those events that the families go to, so that they can trust you, because if they don't trust you, they're not going to be talking to you. So you do have a difficult position. I'm not one to say, it's easy to get out there. You have to be, you have to be a strategist, you have to be an analyst, you have to be a social worker. You have to know what you're, an advocate for the children. It's a lot, that this job entails, where it's really not that evident when you sign up for it, but when you get into it, you realize how multifaceted it is.
There were a couple other comments of asking for real specific things from Emily, and I think Emily just answered it really well, saying, hey, here's my information. I think that's we're not going to be able to answer everything that they were able to do to change right now in the session, but I think one of the beauties of these sessions is Emily has said, hey, if you want to talk, here's my phone number. And so as you guys are in different sessions and someone says something that you want to learn more, feel free to reach out to them and see if you can talk to them too afterwards, because that I think is the silver lining through absolutely everything that we're doing, that you're going to meet people who can give you ideas, just like Emily shared that she got ideas from others.
Okay, and I will just finish up here, and then I'll just have about 2 or 3 minutes for questions. So let me just finish up with some reminders from the Office of Migrant Education. So I would just like to remind everybody that eligibility determinations and COEs do not automatically transfer from state to state. Eligibility determinations are a state-specific responsibility. So not necessarily everyone who's eligible in one state may be eligible in another state. That is up to the state to determine. Each state has to then have confidence in the accuracy of its eligibility determinations. So that is why, it is so important for you, to know what it is, to know the guidance and to know the statute, to know the regulations, in terms of feeling confident, that you've made the correct eligibility determination. And that's why it's so important to be going to events like this so that you can really sharpen your skills and you hone your ability to actually get in there and really do a very good interview, with the families. If you're unsure or have questions about an eligibility determination, you should never be afraid to ask. That is a responsibility of the state, and the determination, the eligibility determination rests on the state. So they should welcome any questions that you may have, of course, following your proper protocol. If you're located in a district, I'm sure you reach up to somebody at the district level, and then from the district level, it may go to the regional level. From the regional level, it may go to the state level. Or if you're in a smaller state, it might be just from you up to your state contact. Okay, because identification is important. Child counts have to be accurate, and incorrectly enrolling and incorrectly enrolling ineligible children, that really not only damages the program in your state, but it damages the program nationwide. So again, can't really underemphasize or overemphasize the importance of making good eligibility determinations. And then just as a reminder that the states and the local MEPs have to use the National Certificate of Eligibility, and that a COE must be completed each time the child makes a new qualifying move that renews the child's eligibility for the MEP, and that states can add state-specific information within the parameters of the instructions, but that section on the eligibility determination has to remain the same. And COEs are always completed based on the known facts at the time of an interview. As a very quick example, if I am interviewing somebody who is going to work in a poultry plant, and at the time of the interview, I make the determination that that family is only going to be there for 3 months. Then that family eventually moves to another state. The recruiter goes out, talks to the family, and finds out that that family was actually at that poultry plant for 15 months. At that time, that family did not stay there on a temporary basis. So while I was able to complete a COE on the facts that I knew in the first state, because the facts at that point in time, was what the family was telling me when I completed the COE, when I'm in the second state, the facts have changed and I cannot complete that COE for that family because I just determined during the interview that it was not a temporary job. It actually turned out to be a permanent job. And just as a reminder, COEs must be signed by the interviewee, the recruiter interviewer, and at least one SEA designated reviewer. Again, remember what I said about the remote flexibilities in terms of signing the COEs. So you're following your state guidance at this point in time, and more to be coming regarding the flexibilities on the signing of the COEs. So just as I'm finishing up here, as I mentioned before, I just want to remind people, please visit the results.ed.gov website, because not only do we have resources there in terms of the non-regulatory guidance, the COE instructions, IDNR manual and curriculum, we do have policy questions and answers. Now, we have not been able to update those in recent years. So you will find those a little bit dated, but we do hope that the states, when we do answer those policy questions and you are part of the IDNR consortium, that you can share those questions among yourselves. And then we also have our presentations. Anytime we do a presentation, we post on our website. So I also do want to thank people for attending this event. And I do have about 4 minutes for questions. So does anybody have any questions for me, Jessica, or should I turn it over to you?
Well, there was a question that that one person had about their state not being allowed to talk. It says the state of Texas has previously said we cannot contact other states for information on migrant students coming to Texas from other states. Is this the case? And so we sent a comment that said, well, you can't base it on, the COE from someone else. You have to make sure you make your own determination. And then there was another comment that says, hey, remember, states may have their own policies. So make sure that you consult with your state leadership if there is something specific that you're wondering why that is your policy in your state. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yes, and I think that is a wonderful response. It really is, because it is, it is you doing the interviewing at that time. It is not really about reaching out to another state and saying, hey, I have this family here and I'm trying to recruit them for the MEP, and I just want to make sure they're recruited by your state. You are talking to the family. You are making that eligibility determination. We don't have in statute, we don't even have in guidance, we don't have in regulations that you have to contact another state. You should be confident enough in your interview with the family and knowing how to record and make your comments if you need to make your comments, or even reaching up to your supervisor or whoever that person is if you have questions about the eligibility determinations. So we just want to reiterate that. So then I will then turn it over to you, Jessica, and thank you so much for allowing me to welcome the group and participate for this bit into the IDRC, the Summer Recruitment Institute. And if it's okay with you, I will put myself on mute and turn off my video, but listen in to the remainder. Thank you.
No, thank you for joining us. Like I said, we're funded through OME, so we're always grateful. We realize, I know that the purpose of, we're big believers in the consortium really should help everyone. And so we're grateful for the chance to be able to offer this.
And as I said before, the Office of Migrant Education really considers IDRC and your involvement to be a wonderful resource for the nation. So thank you for everything that you do. Okay.
Well, thank you. There's a lot of us doing a lot of stuff. So I'm going to switch over to kind of change with the backdrop of what Pat just shared on some of the national trends that we're seeing that are just looking at how life is different since the pandemic began, and some things to kind of think about in our strategies when we're trying to do IDNR. I'm a big one that really believes in a lot of data. And so the slides, I'm not going to read the slides, but because I'm trying to back this up, some of you may put, don't put so much stuff on your slides. There's a purpose for that. One is I want to make sure that I share this and I get the correct facts. And so it's not all in my head, but these are also for you to be able to kind of make sense out of things. And so this is just looking at, again, kind of what's happened since the pandemic started and kind of a different spin on than sometimes just related to ag things. It says in open-ended responses about COVID, we all know that, COVID has impacted our lives, but here is from the Pew Research Center, just looking at how it's changed either on a positive or a negative impact for us. And so just kind of putting a little context into just what we do. Just all of us looking at, was COVID good for us with our personal relationships? How are they, how are we able to spend our time, physical and mental health, society, politics, and safety precautions? Things really looked very different for people. Some people say 73% was positive, 89% negative. So you can see that we're, the one thing that it did was affect all of us differently. And we're still seeing some of those effects that still impact the work that we do, the way we do our work, the families that we work with. So I'm just going to kind of go through stick with me, it'll make sense when I get through it. But an interesting part was that the numbers in the different parts of the country look totally different. And so we all went through the pandemic up to now, but we went through it in different ways. And so you can see, the Northeast was impacted at certain times, the South was impacted at certain times. And we may all think we've gone through the same thing, but the way that it's impacted our regions has also been unique in its own ways. So vaccinations, whatever side of the, you feel about that, interesting looking back up to this point now. It says Latinos and Asians are more likely to be vaccinated. I know a lot of migrant programs across the country worked in vaccination efforts. And so it was just interesting to see, numbers of how things have kind of come out. Moving on a different front, the amount of jobs. I found this to be very interesting in that, February 2020, we had 152.5 million jobs. And then you look at, all of this, you look at the difference, we still have, 2.1 million fewer jobs less than we had in February. So when the pandemic started. So we may have seen some changes in some areas, but we still have less employment out there. Certain sectors really did well and other sectors really were challenged by this. You see like mining and logging were down 12.5%, leisure and hospitality 9% down. You can just see all the way down total non-farm jobs 1.4%. And then the things that really did well: transportation, warehousing, professional business services, information, financial activities. So you kind of look and think, okay, well, how does agriculture kind of fit in this? And was agriculture affected in general by, like you may look at it and say, well, how does this impact migrant ed? Or you look at leisure and hospitality, half of the food in our country, there were two different routes for where agriculture was going. It was restaurants and schools, and then there was supermarkets. So some of these areas that as they had these decreases had an impact on migrant ed, but we may not have even seen this. And this is where I have too many phones and I thought I turned that off. Okay, so it says COVID-19 has changed American life. Let me turn that off really fast. Okay, I apologize. I thought I had it turned off. So it says it's changed our life dramatically. We're more isolated. We were isolated during the pandemic. Many people lost their jobs. These are things that we all know. Down at the bottom of this quote, I found it really interesting that it said life expectancy decreased, particularly for Black and Latino Americans. And then looking into this, you would think, okay, what is it because people had more, there were more deaths, or there, what exactly was? Really interesting. It says, though US Hispanics have a longer life expectancy than non-Hispanic whites or Blacks, they've had the largest decline in life expectancy of these three groups during 2020. All three, a 3-year drop from 81.8 years in 2019 to 78.8 years in 2020. Hispanics males had the largest decline in life expectancy in 2020 with a drop of 3.7 years. So, and interesting to note that that the life expectancy, you look at the total population, the life expectancy has been impacted in different ways. So, you look at the change, there has been a decrease. And like it says here, the disparity in life expectancy between the Hispanic population and the non-Hispanic white population closed significantly from 3 years in 2019 to 1.2 years in 2020. So the gap in life expectancy between the Hispanic population and the non-Hispanic Black population barely changed from 7.1 years to 7 years. So interesting to see, that people say, well, why is it that one group has this, they call it the paradox. Like, why is it that certain populations are having a longer life expectancies than others? And sometimes people would erroneously assume that maybe Hispanic males would have a less, their life expectancy would be less than a white male, but that's not the case. And so it was really interesting. They said they really puzzled over, years of why Hispanics, looking in general, this, sometimes trying to put people in boxes, but saying there might be some socioeconomic disadvantages that could make people have shorter lives. But actually, they say that, infant and adult mortality rates are strongly associated usually with income and education levels. And they say people who've had low income and lack high school degrees have very high mortality rates compared to people with high incomes. But then they'll say, well, why does one population, says, well, Hispanics' poverty and education levels are closer to those of US Blacks. Their mortality rates are more similar to non-Hispanic whites. So they say, how do they defy? I found this very interesting. It says one explanation is that cultural factors such as better health habits and stronger networks of social support in the Hispanic community may offer protection from some diseases and tend to lead longer lives. So sometimes they're looking at trends that have happened because of the pandemic that is looking at other trends to say, why is it that we may assume that certain things are going to happen and it's not the case. And so switching on to looking at our workplace, I know I have been fortunate in the last 20 years, I've always had a home office. Many years ago when I first started, I kind of felt like that was a bad thing because I wanted to go to work somewhere. And my employer, when I first started with Migrant Ed, said, hey, well, you can work from your home. And I wasn't sure how I felt about that, but I guess it's been 21 years later. I absolutely love it, but said a lot of times during the pandemic, many of us had the chance to work from home a lot more. And since March 2020, millions of Americans have left jobs for positions they believe offer a better balance between their personal and professional lives. And I'm going to bring this back around to how this impacts us in migrant ed. But it says here, in fact, the trend is so significant that workplace experts have described it as the Great Resignation. So all of us know people that have shifted jobs or changed, have been able to work from home. But that has an impact on the workers that are available, on the labor force and where they're working, and then how that impacts each one of us. So it says another thing that has changed for many workers. It says a little bit in the middle here, it says even for those who were lucky enough to avoid infection, the life began to look very different. Most workplaces were closed. People started working from home. Essential workers still showed up at their workplaces. The hospitals, the grocery stores, our migrant families were out working in the fields, but they were under different rules. And the way when this shift starts happening, where some people are going to work and some are not, it says the idea of remote work has kind of taken hold, and they expect that this is something that will continue for years. But this impact, this movement of where we were going, we all know about this, but it says theater chains, concert organizers, and dine-in restaurants have all taken massive hits in the face of the pandemic lockdowns. For example, just one company, Live Nation, which hosted over 40,000 concerts worldwide in 2019, went to almost no concerts. And then they were talking about just the demise of so many restaurants. And so, of course, that's tied to, the ag chain of where farms are, really selling their food and how they're selling that. Nationally, and it says the overwhelming discussion was looking not only nationally, but globally. In the first quarter of 2020, the United States GDP lost an estimated 1.5 trillion in economic output. This decline in global growth has impacted farmers and ranchers in 3 distinct ways. And so you think of, okay, we look at our local, your theater or your restaurants or all of these things, they're all tied together. We're all in this together. The amount of workers that are available, the amount of food that's available. I think if anything, the pandemic has shown how closely tied so many supply chains are, so many, the importance of having workers in different fields. And, you lose, you don't have enough truck drivers and that impacts. You don't have enough baby formula with what's going on right now. It has a huge impact. And so I think that's one thing that the pandemic has really brought out. So before we ever started the pandemic, we had tariff challenges back and forth between the US and China. And so this was several years ago. And so there were tariffs or taxes that were put on, specific products that a lot of those were not ever taken away. And so there was an agreement that the US and China would have, these phases of when these tariffs would be taken off once they reached so much trade. And so it says here, the Chinese economy was one of the hardest hit by COVID-19 after they had a 10-week long quarantine to really try to flatten their curve. And they weren't sure whether, because of this, whether they would actually be able to even meet the parts of the trade deal that they had to have so much trade between the US and China. So they had, made steps forward and reported purchases of, certain products, but there were problems at ports, there were problems about inspections, there were problems about enough workers at, doing inspections. And so this caused additional challenges. So then when you look at the food supply, which was something that was really not highlighted before the pandemic. Like we all just think, okay, the farmer produces the food and what we didn't realize was that there was a full food chain that was going directly to restaurants, to hotels, to schools. And then there was a separate chain that was going to the stores and to the markets where people were buying things. And the packaging that needs to be done, everything that needs to be related to this are 2 separate processes. And so when the restaurant shut down, we're seeing farmers dumping things and donating potatoes from Idaho to places because they can't sell them. And people would say, well, why can't you just fix the supply chain so that, those potatoes can be given to the supermarkets? Well, what we don't realize is our food goes all over the world. And so as you have tariffs and as you have, natural disasters and as you have wars and all of these things, it impacts what we see at the store, and it impacts whether the farmer is able to produce their food and get it to the place that they need to. So it says here at the bottom, business closures across the nation have highlighted the fragility that exists within the food supply chain. So a grocer may have a bunch of people showing up to buy toilet paper, as we all know, and it's not there because of the chain of where it normally went. And so I think of, if anything, we've learned that our supply chain is very fragile and one or two things can really throw it out of whack. And so it says here, government programs such as Farmers to Families have shifted the distribution of food supply, but is it enough? The lack of agriculture workers available has created major bottlenecks in the system. Probably about 10 years ago, we did a lit review for one of the consortiums that was really looking at this idea that there was not enough agriculture workers. And it was kind of, they would say, well, either you're going to import your workers or you're going to import your food. And at the time it was like, that's an interesting idea. We are at that point. We do not have enough agriculture workers across the country for everything that's needed. And then you looked at the supply chain problems in that there may have been dairy, but not enough, to get to the stores or in the right bottling system or whatever. It says row crop farmers are choosing to plow over their fields, their crops, instead of watching them rot in the fields. Slaughterhouses during the pandemic were processing plants were closing, and sometimes they couldn't get the cows to the right place. And so again, this problem of our system. So one thing that I found really interesting is a lot of times you have all these negative things that are saying, hey, our system's broken or this. And you've seen that people have risen to the challenge. They've come up with new ways to do things. And it says in the middle of this, it says our food supply chain may be under pressure, but it is far from broken. It's important that we step back and reflect on the lessons that we've learned as we navigate this crisis. This pandemic has cast a light on the cracks in the food distribution. From these cracks, the Farm Bureau is saying, hey, we can work towards creating a more stable system for the future. So that right now is way, way, way on everyone's minds as far as, that food chain, is it set up right? Do we have all the, logistics that need to be in place? And there are continual things that we're still seeing because of the pandemic, because of the ongoing things that are still impacting what we're seeing right now. There has been a more increased focus on health. So it says, although the pandemic has, altered ways that we work, where we play, where we worship, they've also seen that it's changed the way that we look at healthcare. I think it was with Go Soci several years ago, we were doing something on ACEs, on trauma and mental health. And we couldn't find, we had to research to see, just awareness of what was happening. And now it seems like it's everywhere. Everyone all over the place is super aware of all of these different impacts on mental health. It says here, people are thinking about their own health and the health of their loved ones in ways that we probably didn't think about. This is kind of something that's a lot more on our minds since the pandemic. Here they look at, where we're actually working. We talked about a little bit about working remotely. In the middle of this, it says Nick Bloom, a Stanford University economist, anticipates 25% of work will be done from home after the pandemic ends. And a recent survey found the US employee values, throwing this in there, I'm going to go right back to the quote here in just a second, but some of you are employers of recruiters. And we're always looking at turnover of like, why are people coming and going? And I found this was kind of an interesting quote. It says a recent survey found the US employee values 2 to 3 days of remote work each week as much as a 6% pay hike. Now, of course, like Pat says, we can't all just be hanging out in our offices and hoping we're going to find migrant families that way. We need to really be out and trying to find that. But I do think it's interesting to think that, maybe sometimes people would like a home office, or they, some people don't like that. But understanding kind of worker health and what people are, really helps them thrive is something that's also essential as an employer. And it says that many would seek a new job if they were required to come back to the office permanently, which is kind of interesting, which 2-3 years ago, we would never even thought that way, but it's changed perspective. Well, then when you think about people really, going and living in specific places, it says that because of the pandemic, because people could work remotely, it's actually changed where people are living. And so it says hundreds of thousands of Americans have fled coastal cities like New York and San Francisco to more affordable locations in southern or mountain states. I live out on this middle of the road in this place called McMinnville, Tennessee. And even on the road that I live on, I have people that have come from multiple states in the last year and a half, that you can see that people are coming from all over. It says people from Wall Street have been heading south to Florida. More tech companies are increasingly looking inland. More than 4 in 10 listings for higher educated white collar jobs at West Coast tech firms are outside the region. So just kind of interesting that movement is happening for a lot of things. And so some of those movement can have impacts on others. And so then there's the big question of where are the workers? It says that's, the fact that this movement is happening, it says it's heating up many local economies. which actually can bring drawbacks down. Some of the hottest pandemic housing markets have been in cities like Boise, Idaho, and Phoenix, which between them have had more than 100,000 additional workers compared with before COVID. So that's when you sometimes see that housing becomes really hard to get, or that prices go up. And so it says, and then here, the biggest thing, local employers are having to compete with big city wages. And so you think of how that all impacts, someone comes in and expects to be paid what they had in New York, and maybe Boise's not ready for that. And so just very interesting how this all connects. It says job openings are near record highs from states from Georgia to Utah, have had all-time low unemployment rates. So, very big turnaround from 2020 when more than 20 million Americans lost their job. So it says labor markets may not always be this tight, but slower population growth. So we're having less kids than we had in the past, and less immigration are really propping up this demand for workers. And you can drive around almost anywhere in the country and see we need workers. And that several years ago, they would say 1 in 4 farmers, their biggest challenge was, what was 1 in 8, was not having enough workers. Well, now they're saying it's 1 in 4. And so that's a big thing for us. So it says with so much switching going on, 1 in 5 adults quit their jobs last year, according to an economics advisor from Cornell. And it says there's reason to hope for a broader rethink among employers, which should bring stability to workers. And this was really fascinating to think about. So years ago, when we would work with like a processing plant, and we would go in and talk to meat processing workers, there was so much turnover. And it was actually cheaper for them to bring in more workers than have to pay benefits. And then we've had a shift of, hey, we've got to really hold on to our workers, which makes it a challenge, on our end where we're trying to find temporary work. But the idea that the employer now really has to think about what can they do to bring stability, because there's not enough workers. And so, years ago when I was visiting a Tyson plant, and they had lines of workers that wanted to get in, that's not happening anymore. So it says there's been a strong emphasis over the past 20 to 30 years to contain the cost and to contain personnel costs. Like, how can we get the cheapest cost possible for personnel? Because it is so expensive. They're now looking at how can I make, something so that this looks like a long-term career. I was working with a migrant ed state recently where they were saying, how do we hold on to our recruiters? And we were just looking at the types of benefits that you could offer a recruiter that makes it seem like a stable job, or the kind of job that you give them, a short-term contract for this, and it seems very unstable. And so was the price difference going to give them what they needed in the long run to make sure that they could find all the families, or was it better to have that turnover? And they were looking at that logistics to see which, with their funding, with their current situation, which was the best for them. And so these are conversations that are happening in all sorts of job areas, including agriculture, including farm workers, that to say, how do we hold on to our people? Then you have this challenge of, okay, all of us have gone to Walmart recently, and many of us have had to check out our own food. They're testing systems where you'll see 5 workers standing on the side, and there's only 2 that are, just doing the regular lines. And it's like, hey, check out our new system. So it says here, one fear for many US workers is that they'll lose their job to robots. Labor shortages and rising wages have pushed businesses to invest in technology that automates, and that's to try to survive. Restaurants and bars, for example, are switching to app-based or digital ordering, as we've seen. McDonald's has been rolling out kiosks where customers tap in their orders, and they're actually looking at the possibility of automating frying and grilling. So they do not have the supply of US teenager workers that we used to have in this system. It says Hilton has expanded a system of contactless check-in via mobile phones. All of us have seen these things. And the UPS has said automation initiatives like label application have freed up 1,200 people inside their buildings this year. They're doing this because there is not enough workers. Or they think that that cost of you're trying to make it, you're trying to figure out how you can really streamline your costs, and that's a way that they're finding. It says that kind of technology can augment human labor as well as simply replacing it. So they're looking at saying, well, is this going to make things better, or is this going to actually make these income and wealth gaps even worse? We'll have to see. It says most firms will not reverse their automation decisions once they've installed robots or self-checkout kiosks. Sometimes I feel like it's like, oh, I'm going to go through the line at in Walmart because I feel like this lady needs her job and they're not paying me to do my own groceries. Maybe it's bad attitude, but it says the increased automation in many consumer-facing industries might mean even fewer decent jobs for low education and some semi-skilled workers. So I'm sharing all of this so you can see how so many things are connected. You kind of think, how does this all go? And then there's inflation. It says the pandemic recovery has brought out the boogeyman out of the closet. After decades when inflation was subdued, often dropping below the Fed's target rate, it is now running at the fastest pace in 40 years. So we can see the impact on all of us personally. It can be an obvious thing, but you think of the work families that we're working with. It says this means that most Americans have never seen the price increases they're confronted with today. Now, all of us know that our wages are not going right up the same as inflation. We are now having to deal with needing the same things and having a lot less resources. And you can see the impacts that would have on the families that we serve. It says even workers who are getting, maybe the workers that are getting higher wages than they did before, that is quickly going away when you look at the cost of things. And so gas, just the price of gas. And I think where I am, it's way above this. Used cars. One of my boys bought a truck several years ago that it is now worth almost 3 times what he paid for it. And so he'll say, oh, I could sell my truck. I said, yeah, the problem is you sell it, you got to pay the same thing to go out and get one of equal value. And so electricity, food at home, all of these things are going, really, really impacting everyone. So right now, I thought I would highlight, the baby food issue, because it looks exactly at what we were just mentioning and how all of these things impact. It says many economists think that supply chain disruptions, like we talked about, the supply chain being pretty fragile, are going to be something that we're going to continue to see. And then as we see, someone put in the comment earlier just about climate change or about, we have tensions like war in different places, that this is going to be something that they think might continue to happen. And so I found all my kids are a little bit older, so baby formula is not something that's right on my radar, but I have people around me that it's a major thing. And I just thought, why do we have this shortage? And so just to give you a little bit of context, you might all know this, but I think it highlights what we're talking about. So it says last year, Abbott was a baby formula maker. They accounted for 42% of the US formula market, about 95% of which is produced domestically. So there are only 4 major manufacturers of US formula in the US today: Mead Johnson, Abbott, Nestle, and Perrigo. So the reason it's so concentrated is there are tariffs, if we get this from other countries, of 17.5% on imports. And that's made to kind of make sure that a lot of this can be produced at home and we don't have as much foreign competition. So then there's some non-trade barriers, such as the labeling and the ingredient requirements that also limit imports even during shortages. So you may say, well, we don't have enough. Well, if we don't have enough, they still have to make sure that they're meeting that same labeling and ingredient requirements that we would have for the same baby formula here. So Canada has a really strong dairy industry. They prop up a bunch of their efforts in dairy, and they've been doing really well, but it is kind of a government-backed program. And the Trump administration sought to kind of protect US dairy producers. And so there were some quotas and tariffs that were put on Canadian imports as part of the USMCA deal. And so we can inspect foreign plants, but there is, if we're going to get this from Canada, there's going to be, a much higher tariff put on the product. So these things are already in play. And then you add the WIC program in. So the Department of Agriculture's estimate, WIC accounted for 57 to 68% of all infant formula sold in the United States. Under that welfare program, each state awards an exclusive formula contractor to a manufacturer. So Tennessee may go with Nestle or with Abbott, but those contracts will go directly, to those different producers. So companies compete for the contracts by offering states huge rebates on the formula women can buy. This rebate's equal to about 80% of the wholesale cost, according to a study back in 2011. Women can only use those WIC vouchers to purchase the formula for that particular winning manufacturer. So that rebates the state spending, that they don't have to spend as much, so you would think, why would they want this huge discount? It says the contracts effectively give them a state monopoly. So stores give WIC brands more store shelf. Physicians also would be more likely to recommend WIC brands. And after 30 states switched their WIC contracts between 2005 and 2008, that new provider's market share increased by 84%. So you have these less and less and less, competition of companies because more and more are kind of taking over the market. So it's kind of interesting. This is from an article from the Wall Street Journal. It says America's baby formula shortage illustrates how bigger government can make big business bigger, thereby limiting competition and choice. So just the fact that there are these exclusive contracts awarded to a certain manufacturer, now there's a problem because when one of those goes down for whatever reason, whether it's right now because of the tainted products that they're seeing, that impacts the rest of the market too. And so it's really interesting how all of these things are together. And so there was a comment here from Alejandro. It says farmers here in Kansas are seeing a shortage and an increase to the price of fertilizers. Fertilizer is extremely expensive right now. And Ukraine is a huge producer of wheat. Russia is a huge producer of fertilizer. And so this was going up even before this was happening. Fertilizer has been going up. I mean, it's extremely expensive. And so there have been, warnings that there will be food shortages just due to the price of, to be able to fertilize. Most of the crops that are grown on large scale require fertilization. They have to have the fertilizer or else it's not going to work. So very good comment on that. So farm wage, you would think, okay, we now know that there's a shorter of workers. What does this look like for our farm workers? One thing that we're able to see that the wages that the workers are getting are lagging behind, but they are going up. And so it's, right here, it says, according to the FLS data, real inflation adjusted wages for non-supervisory crop and livestock workers rose just 1.1% per year between 1990 and 2020. In the past years, however, the real farm wages grew at 2.9% per year. Of course, that cannot cover the difference in inflation and all of that. But whenever the labor market gets tighter, wages go up because you're competing for that. So the gap is shrinking, but there still is a substantial gap. And so you can kind of see our average hourly wage here for some of these different jobs. The managers, you're looking at $25.58. It's a 3% growth. But you can look at all agriculture workers, $14 is the average wage. It's actually down a little bit, but some of them, depending on where they are, you can kind of see the average that you're seeing. So labor costs are major costs in agriculture. You can see that, depending on the crops themselves, you can see the percentage. So it says here, the labor cost is a share of the total gross cash farm income for selected farm specializations. The most expensive, you can see right here, you've got nurseries and greenhouses being almost 30% of their total, the income is going to go directly to labor. And then you can see dairy being one of the cheaper ones. Just interesting to know that, depending on the area that you're at, as the prices go up, it's going to hit some farms and some places more than others, depending on the types of work that they're doing. Here is a recent, this is 2019. I know that seems like a while ago, but here is where USDA is saying the hired farm workers are by census region and metropolitan status. So you can kind of see, depending on where you are, specifically what's going on there. And then interesting, the average age of US farm laborers. So some of them, you look at years past, you're looking at 36, or you're looking at, maybe 37. Right now, we are looking at the average farm laborer is 39, foreign born, it's much older, US born, it's younger. So you can kind of see the ages of the population out there that's working. Also the increase of women out in the fields and just in agriculture in general, it is increasing little by little. You can see that. And there's just this huge, we're still very much in this major labor shortage. And so this is going to start talking a little bit more about agriculture. So the United States currently faces a labor shortage, a persisting imbalance between employers' need for workers and the number of available workers in the US workforce. In the last 7 months, job vacancies have consistently surpassed 10 million, while the average number of hires only 6.6 million, and employee turnover accounted for 6 million. So we now have 3 million fewer workers than in early 2020, which is a 20% reduction, or 2% reduction, sorry. 20% would be insane. So I've seen in the chat box, a lot of you saying, hey, what we're seeing is that, decreases, we're also seeing a huge increase in H2A. And so we do have some resources that we'll share throughout the Institute that's, talking about how you can get those lists of those H2A workers each month. I think most of you are familiar with this, but you can see the huge increase. says, why does tomatoes do not increase even though everything does? Thus, farmers don't have better gain to increase salary. This is a question I was asked by farm workers. He said the price in Tennessee stores always is $1.98 per pound. Okay, so that's a very good question. So sometimes you say, why is everything getting more expensive? A lot of crops we have to compete. Let's say the Tennessee, I live here in Tennessee and know many of the farmers. In years past, we would go out to the fields and sometimes the tomatoes would be left in the field. And you think, why on earth would you do that? Well, tomatoes has to compete globally. So we have tomatoes that come from all over the world that, I may go to my local Walmart to get food and I may be eating a tomato that comes directly from Mexico. So they still have to compete against prices of other countries. And so if the Walmart can get a contract to get tomatoes from Mexico for $1.98, the Tennessee grower cannot sell his for $2.25 because no one will buy them. And so they are still competing against other places because, a lot of the places that fruits and vegetables come can literally be all over the world. And so that explains why, that you can see that, the price is not changing. So here, this is looking at H2A. You can see the states that continue to have a lot of H2A. Georgia's a big one. Florida's a big one. You can see Washington is kind of increased. California's increased. North Carolina continues to increase. And you can see like Arkansas on the top and Kentucky. These are some of the biggest states. And so you can kind of see that if you're seeing more, this chart is probably validating what you're seeing. So there's something called the adverse effect wage rates. And so this plays a big part into the amount that H2A workers are paid. And so you can see in the South, it's pretty cheaper. It's maybe cheaper than Washington, $16.34. You can see now, remember, there were certain places there were more workers. There were other places where there was less workers. But this next slide, it says H2A employers must provide transportation and housing and pay the higher of the applicable state or federal minimum wage. So the prevailing wage in that region and occupation as determined by the U.S. Department of Labor. So that is a wage they have to pay. They have to make sure that the farm worker is getting that. If they could pay less, it would kind of cut out local workers too. If it was cheaper, in some senses, they may feel that it's cheaper in the long run because the local worker has to provide their own housing and all of those things. But nationally, if they could undercut that price, that would be a really negative effect for all of the local workers. And so here you can see it says for fiscal year 2021, this minimum hourly wage ranged from $11.81 in southern states all the way to $16.34 in Oregon and Washington. So there was a comment here. I always buy the fruit at the store that I know South Carolina farm workers have picked. So yeah, if you know where your things are coming from, it says depending on where you live, and PBC Florida, we can have them at 2 pounds for $1. So yeah, you can try to get those things locally if you can, but you wonder why the price doesn't change. It's because they have to compete nationally or internationally. So then we talked about supply chains earlier. You can think about labor shortages on supply chains are not just the people that were in the jobs that were making the supplies. It's actually the movement. It's, do you have enough truckers? Do you have enough warehouse workers? Do you have everything that you need to get this product where it needs to go? So it says here, labor shortages have also had a negative impact on supply chains, where it's driven inflation, created bottlenecks in the economy. Supply chain is usually the invisible pathway of manufacturing, transportation, and logistics that get these goods where they need to go. There's been severe shortages of port workers, truck drivers, warehouse workers, and on these supply chains, and that's where those bottlenecks are starting. And they've also given rise to volatile prices and delivery delays. The congestion in the supply chain has been so disruptive in the United States that the International Monetary Fund estimates that it will produce a downward 1.2 impact on America's 6% estimated growth of its economy in 2022. So that is huge. I mean, you just can't. My husband bought a skid steer a couple years ago, and there were like 25 that we could pick from on this Bobcat lot. Now that same place can't get them in to even be able to sell them. And so it's interesting, in 2 or 3 years, you could get certain parts and do things without thinking. And now you can go, you have a chainsaw and you can't get it fixed for 3 months because the little piece that you need to have to get fixed is not available for 3 or 4 months. So of course that's lost income for that store right there you would normally buy from it, from the supplier, from everything. And you can just see that this is happening across, all different areas. So specifically in agriculture, it says notably the impacts of labor shortages are hitting the agriculture and food sectors particularly hard. The lack of farm workers, meat packing workers, food processing workers, and grocery workers have left a wide range of food products in short supply. The agricultural labor deficit in the United States reached record high levels in 2021. According to the Ag Economy Barometer from Purdue University, which measures this agricultural workforce conditions, 66% of agriculture employers experienced some or a lot of difficulty hiring adequate labor in 2021 compared to 2020. So that's just 1 year difference that you can see. The Farm Bureau has also similarly raised concerns about growing labor shortages in the agriculture sector, arguing that our country needs immigrant farm workers more than ever. Farm worker shortages have resulted in rising food prices for consumers, contributes also to inflation, and as much as $3 billion in missed GDP growth. Attracting and retaining immigrant farm workers would really help, reduce those shortages while helping this sector reach its full economic potential. So there are a lot of information out there that are saying, hey, we really, really need a lot more farm workers. And then you look on the other side, it says farm work is twice as deadly as law enforcement, 5 times deadlier than firefighting. And doctors say who have treated farm workers say virtually all of them will experience pain and injury because of the nature of farm work. And then, that right now we see the economic challenges that everyone's facing, especially those that are on a lower income. And so I feel like I'm always bringing negative news to about agriculture, but we continue to be in a really challenging time for agriculture. And so I feel like that we are in the side of to really be able to make a difference and really make an impact on migrant families, on all that they have to worry about, all that's going on. When we can serve their kids, when we can find them and help them, it really is, just absolutely important. And so there's some quotes here. It says, agriculture is a fundamental source of national prosperity. Investments in agriculture are best weapons against hunger and poverty, and they have made the life better for billions of people. You can just, I like this one on the top that says a farmer has to be an optimist or else he would not still be, a farmer. And you're allowed to scream, you're allowed to cry, but do not give up. And so I guess as our, opening session for this week, I'm skipping ahead there. That's my next slide. Just takeaways so that if you couldn't connect the dots and I was all over the place, which, I've been known to do that, just wanted the takeaways is the way that we operate since the pandemic has changed. Global markets right now continue to be challenged. The pandemic highlights this very fragile supply system that we have, worker system at the same time. Just these disruptions that we have due to policies and previous disruptions, we're not over them. We're not out of this. Inflation, we're not sure where this is going to go. We're not sure the impact that it's going to have. There's an immense labor shortage. Some of you are seeing it in your schools and in your, with the people that you're not being able to find enough workers. Migrant families and farm workers face great challenges right now, and agriculture is still in flux from the changes in the food system supply chain. So, those little things that we mentioned, like trying to buy local and trying to support your local system, everything that we do is really impactful. But the main reason that we're all here today is to serve migrant families. And so with all the challenges that are going on now more than any other time, I feel like we have to be innovative. We have to ensure that the kiddos that we are supposed to serve are getting that help, that we don't waste all of our migrant program in just being a recruiting program. And we don't, like Pat mentioned, we don't streamline our efforts. We don't know where we're going to go. We drive around, and then in the end, we give a hygiene bag and a pack of something else to a kid and say, hey, this is, we're the migrant program. We should be making a lasting difference in these families' lives. And so if we can have streamlined IDNR efforts, balance efforts to ensure that we're effective and that we're out there doing these things, we will be able to serve the kids for what this program was really meant so much better. And so I guess our challenge with IDRC is to make sure that we try to put resources out using the expertise of our member states and the knowledge that they have, that we put tools out there that hopefully make IDNR easier for you all. And so the next 3 or 4 days, we're going to have sessions from practitioners, people who are doing this job out in the field. We're going to share with you ideas and things that you can do to try to serve your migrant, to find them quickly, and then hopefully we even have some resources that are available to everyone to actually help serve families too. And so I think time-wise, we're at about 11:21. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. and then we'll take any questions in the chat box that anyone has.